Hey there, tubers. I have a project today. I'm going to add a second and third hydraulic remote valve to the CT5555. So there is the second hydraulic valve kit, and the third one looks just like it. And I'm going to get all that put up in here. So let's get started. See what happens first. Alright, I guess the first thing you got to do is remove this cover and disconnect everything on it. So let's see how easy that is. Should be just a couple of tabs back here. This is plastic, so I got to be careful not to break it. But yeah, it's going to be a little tougher than I thought. This might be a two-hand job. So let me give that a shot and I'll be right back. So yeah, I just pried right in this area on both sides. There should be two more tabs up here. Once you get these, it should just pop right out, which it did. And then flip it up. Glad to see there's lots of dirt everywhere. And then we'll just disconnect all this stuff. And I think the reason you got to pull this is because all this outer plastic has to come off. So I think that's the only reason that you got to disconnect this stuff. So I'll get this disconnected and we'll move on to the next one. Alright, so those are disconnected. The next thing is to come down here, and there's a screw in each of these handles. Take those screws out, pull the handles off, and then there's two screws here, and then this piece will come off. So I'll get those pulled out and get that off and go to the next step. Alright, it turns out these are not screws. These are push pins that are stamped to look like screws. So what you have to do is, where they've got these little indentations here, you get a pick under there and pull up on it. As you can tell, just by putting a screwdriver in there and trying to turn it, this plastic is so soft that it started to mar it. So don't do what I did. Just get something in there, a pick, or it's a very small hole, so you'd have to have an awful tiny screwdriver to get in there, but I used a pick, was able to pry those up, and then it comes right off. So I'll get this pulled out and then we'll carry on. So that panel is harder to get out than it looks. These little tabs on the side here go right in there. But with the handle being bent at an angle, you really have to bow this plastic to get it to come out. And I'm guessing it's going to be a joy once we get the other two handles in there to get it in or out. But it does come out. It's just a little bit of a pain. Alright, the next step is to take this panel here off, and once again, same situation as before. These are not screws. Just get in behind there. What I used is this pick here, got in behind and was able to work these out. There it comes now, and pop it out. So there's 7 of those. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and then this whole piece should come right out. So I'll get those pulled out and move on. And in addition to those 7 retainers, there's also 3 10mm screws here. If I'd been paying attention, I would have noticed that sooner, but yeah, I'll get those pulled and then that piece will come off. Alright, so what I ended up doing is pulling each of every one of these out, just because there's so many of them at different angles. But the sneaky guys, they put one more screw down under the floor mat. So there's 4 of those 10 millimeters. So I'll get that one off, and then I think it'll come out. Alright, so now that covers off. Looking up in here, looks like my loader hydraulics are leaking just a smidge. I'll deal with that later, but the next thing to do is to move over here to the 3-point and the draft control and pull these handles off, which they should just be pushed on. There's no screws or anything in those. Get those pulled off, and then back behind the seat here, there's an access panel. Pull that access panel off, and then you'll have 8 10 millimeter screws back in here. There's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then there should be another one on the back wall there, for a total of 8, and then this entire piece here will come out. Well, once again, in their infinite wisdom, I don't think you can get this thing out at all without removing the seat. There's just too many things to sneak around. You've got this armrest, you've got the handles for the 3-point and the draft, and I've fiddled with this for quite a while now, and I just don't see a way of getting it out. But I think with it open like it is, I should be able to access everything I need to. It's just running the cables down in through there, so I'm going to leave it as is and carry on. But there's no place in instructions or anything that say that you need to do anything with the seat, so I'm not sure why that is. But while I'm here, looks like kind of a poor design here. My heater hoses rubbing up against this, and this is a sharp edge. So when I put this all back together, I'm going to hose clamp this, get it off to the side, get it away, so I don't eventually rub a hole in that. But yeah, so I'll carry on here and see what's next. Alright, so the next thing to do is to install the lever, spacer, and snap pin. And I'm going to get a little dollop of grease put in here. Maybe put a little on that, and then slide that on there, and should be good to go. Alright, there it is installed. Pretty simple. Got the spacer on the back, the pin. The next thing to do is to grab a pin, spacer, and a keeper and install this. Now what the instructions don't tell you is that you should come around back and pull that grommet off there and feed it in this way, simply because on this end you've got your dust cover, and that's oversized, so if you had to feed this all through, you could probably do it, but I think going in from the back first would be the simplest and easiest. That way you don't chance tearing any of this or doing damage to anything. So I'm going to pull that grommet and feed it through. And in typical fashion, nothing's as easy as it should be. This grommet got put in when the paint was still wet, so it had made itself one with the cab. But I was able to get it off And I'll just feed that line up through here and hook it up. Alright, so this is where it would have been slightly easier had this plastic piece been out of the way. But you come in through the grommet down here. Let me see if this light, trying to get enough light on it for you so you can see better, but come in through this grommet hole down here, and then let me turn the light back on. Maybe you can see what I'm talking about here. There's a keeper right here. It just folds over. That's holding the electrical and the hydraulic cable. And then there's a second one right up in here. Same thing. So you need to route all that stuff through here so that you can eventually fold that back over and hold it in place. Otherwise, route it all the way up here. You pull the lever back, put the pin in, and do some minor adjusting to where you want the handle to be, and that should be it. And since I'm doing a third remote also, I'm going to go ahead and route that one through here right now too, since I got all this apart and am already fighting it. So I'll get that in, and then we'll move on to the next step. Alright, I got the cable in there. I've got the pin through washer clip, and then down here you just want to make sure that you get one washer on the top and one on the bottom, and then you've got your two jam nuts to adjust where you want that handle to be. Alright, so now we'll move to the back and see what's going on back there. Alright, ran into another little snag here. Get these hoses out of the way so you can see better. This whole piece here is welded to the fender. And obviously they welded it just slightly off. You can't get that in there. So I'm going to have to do a little modification here and gentle persuasion to get it on. But I won't have to worry about that handle falling off, because once it's on there, I think it's staying. So I'll get to work on that and see what I can figure out. So after a little gentle persuasion and some swear words, we got this thing in. It's all hooked up, and I think it'll function just fine. Alright, now back to the back of the tractor. Alright, so here at the back, the one factory remote, we'll pull these three bolts off here, a 12mm, we'll take those off. Take this piece off, and we'll come down here to this spacer plate here and put this cable bracket on it, and then we'll put that up in there and put the valve body on after that. Alright, so this spacer plate is already pre-threaded, so we'll just put this bracket up here. Get these screws in, the bolts in, get them tightened down, and then we'll get it put up on there. Alright, got those three bolts out. Now the whole remote is loose in here, so you're going to get some hydraulic leaking. But I was very surprised at those bolts and how corroded they are when they came out. I'm sure that didn't happen here because we haven't had any moisture forever. So I'm guessing that either those had some moisture on them when they got stuck in, or something happened on assembly. But now I'll pull this off and put the spacer and the valve on. Alright, so I pulled that top piece off and two of the O-rings stuck. So you need to make sure that you get all the O-rings off and put them back where they belong. And then this piece already has O-rings on it, and I'll put it on. Alright, so that's what it looks like with the spacer in. Next you would put this valve body on there and then put the top cap back on. But because I'm doing a third remote, what I'll have to do is I'll put this valve body on, then I'll put another spacer, another valve body, and then that top piece. And hopefully the bolts they gave me are long enough to go all the way through all three of these. But I'll get this stuff mounted up and see what happens. So once again, put your cable bracket on the spacer. They're 10 millimeter, we'll tighten those down. And then put the spacer on top of the second remote, and then we'll put the valve body on top of this, put the cap on, and they only gave me one length of bolts, so I'm hoping that's what I need. So I'll get this all put together and see what happens. So that's what everything looks like all stacked up here. As I suspected, they did not give me the right length of bolts. And so what I'm going to have to do is just measure the difference between the ones that were originally in it and this bolt, because it is designed for the dual remote system, not the tri-remote. And it looks like this bolt is about 2 inches longer than the original. So if I get another one that's 2 inches longer than this, that should be adequate, I hope. So I'm gonna have to run to town, get some bolts, and continue when I get back. Alright, another little snag I've run into is that when you order these remote kits, the part number is exactly the same for the second remote as it is for the third, which is why the kits came with the exact same things in them. They basically came same bolts, same handle colors, everything. And because these bolts are only long enough for 2 remotes, I thought, well, I'll run into Bobcat and see if they had a longer bolt, which they don't, and they could not find a part number for a longer bolt. After talking, they called whoever they have to call at Bobcat, and they told them that they don't think they make a longer bolt for them, and that they would have to submit a parts clarification request, and that could take a couple weeks. So that's awesome. So then I went to a couple of the bolt places in town. One was Fastenal, the other was Tacoma Screw. Neither one of them carry metric bolts longer than 3 inches. They could get these in a longer version, but I would have to special order them, and it would be several days. So I think for right now I am going to take this third remote off, just run it with the 2 for now until Bobcat or somebody can get me the proper bolts. So I will be removing this one and just putting it down to 2 for now, and I'll just leave this extra cable hanging out back here. If If I have to, I'll zip tie it to something just to keep it out of the way. But that shouldn't stop me from putting the cab back together. So I will take this off, make sure that these bolts actually work, and then carry on. Alright, so the next thing is to get your couplers here. Put your dust covers on. It just slides on the back side here. These are an O-ring fitting, so I don't need to tape them. And then I'll just screw this into the valve body, and that should be it for that. Alright, so there's one installed. Then this one will go right in here. An 1 1/16 fits that perfectly. I'm sure it's supposed to be metric, but that fit right on there nice and snug, and so that's what I used. Alright, so the next thing will be to install these dust boots up here in the cab, and then get this piece back. See if I can get this thing to focus. Back looped over this, and then we can hook it up here. So I'll get on that and be right back. Okay, so here's the remaining pin, washer, and keeper. That'll go right in there. Got those boots in, and what I did is I lengthened this cable to match the one below, and that's only on the assumption that if I match those on the inside and the outside, then the lever position should theoretically be the same in the cab. We'll find out here shortly, but yeah, I'll get this thrown in and move on. Alright, so that's installed. That ended up being a bigger pain than expected. That plastic washer was thicker, substantially thicker than what it should have been, so I had to sand it down a bit. It took quite a few tries before it fit. I didn't want to take too much off at once, so shaved a little, tried it, shaved a little, and tried it, and after about 8 tries I got enough off. So now we'll just climb up in the cab here and put everything back together. Alright, so before you put the plastics in, make sure that you fold these keepers over. They're holding the cable and the electrical wires. And that way nothing should get out of hand here and rub against anything that it shouldn't. And there's a set here and then a set up in front. I think you can kind of see it there. Just make sure everything's secure, and then you can put your plastics back. Alright, so this plastic is back in, and that ended up being a much bigger pain in the butt than I ever anticipated. I'm not quite sure how I got it out as far as I did, but it definitely did not want to go back in. So one of the things that remind you before you get this far is make sure and tighten up those jam nuts. I almost forgot to do it, but I did do it before I got the plastics in. Otherwise, I don't know that you could without the plastics back out. Everything's a super tight fit, and unfortunately I think that best way to have done this would have been to take these pillars off and then do it, because it has marred up my plastics. I don't know if you can see that, which doesn't make me happy. Sharp edges of plastic against plastic tends to cause problems, so I would highly recommend taking those pillars off before doing this. There's just 4 bolts behind each of those caps. Should be pretty quick and easy, and I think that would help quite a bit. So I'll get the cover back on here, get the knobs put on, put these knobs on, put this back in, and these each follow in an order that matches the cover, so there's no having to remember what went where. So that's simple enough. I'm going to put the zip tie on these, get them up out of the way. Should be good to go, and then I'll put that cover back on. See you in a minute. Alright, so all the plastics are back in. Handles are on. And everything's as it should be. Other than my third remote is not functioning yet. Now, one of the things that you'll have to do to get the handles to line up is to come out back and you'll have to mess with this adjustment. There's an adjustment on both ends, but now that the plastics are back on, this is the easier one to get to. So as you shorten this side up, bring this nut back up into this area, that handle will move outwards. So to bring it back in line, you need to tighten this one up. And I'm just about out of threads, but it was able to line up, so I'm going to leave that one. Now when it gets to this one, I might have to actually adjust the inside one so that I don't run out of threads on this one. And you can adjust them to wherever you like the handles. I like mine in a nice row. I could shorten this up and get them to stagger at a diagonal. I'll just play with it once I start using them, and whatever feels comfortable I'll adjust accordingly. But other than that, once I get some bolts, it's just simply popping this cover off, putting the spacer and the other hydraulic block on, and putting this cover back on and hooking the line up, and that's it. I won't have to pull anything apart inside, and this was a relatively easy job. When you look at all the parts and stuff, it might be overwhelming. The worst part was the plastics, and for the life of me I don't know why they made it that hard, but that's what it is. So yeah, I'll do a follow-up video when I install this, and otherwise, if you have any questions or comments, leave them below. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.